40-something right now. So, in little over a decade, FDI has shot up significantly, and it is very much in line with our perception of Africa rising. But very little of that is coming into infrastructure, and perhaps less still in the power sector. Why?
Thank you. I'll start by saying that, first of all, it's good news that FDI in Africa is increasing. I think that that's a trend that we need to support. I've also noted that a lot of investors are very interested in Africa. They hear about the 6 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. They hear about African capitalists starting up funds and large enterprises, and they're very interested. However, at the same time, I think there are 2 issues. One is that there is a perception of very high risk, and this is mainly political risk, which partly is probably unjustified, and I think that, especially in some countries that are growing very fast and do provide good investment destinations, and I think Africa needs a little bit better marketing, especially in places like the US, to really compete with the other emerging markets who are presenting themselves as investment destinations. I think that's changing, but I think that more of that is needed. I think the other reason is, unfortunately, in some of the countries, including in the countries where we're working, I think that there's been a lot of progress made on regulatory reform, but sectors like energy are still very slow in changing and opening up to private investment. I think I could mention Ethiopia, which actually took a huge step very recently by inviting the first private investor to enter its energy sector and develop a 500 to 1,000 megawatt geothermal plant. This will be the first private investment in the energy sector in Ethiopia. So I really think that changing regulations, opening up markets in a very cautious but deliberate way, especially for investment in the energy sector where so much money is needed. It's more money than I think donors and governments can really muster up. And catalyzing private sector investment is really key. So I think much better marketing and progress on a lot of regulations, and I will add a third one. I know I'm taking a lot. The other one is, and I think most governments recognize this, is just capacity building, meaning that I think that we really need to help a lot of the African regulators become more familiar with how to deal with the private sector, how to really react to investor proposals, so that not only can they in the future do this on their own without additional assistance, but also so that they get equitable deals from these investors that might be coming into these countries. So USAID is very much involved in not only helping change the regulatory regimes and investment environments, but also building the capacity of the governments to maintain this kind of progress and to really gain and maintain the kind of skills that are needed to sustain that.
Okay, so let's take it to a potential recipient country. So Paul, in Tanzania, what does Power Africa mean to you? How, from a country that is part of this initiative, how do you prepare as a country for investment? And what do you expect from the U.S. government agencies to do for you? I'm also interested to hear your perspective on private investment. To what extent do you think you have control over this? And to what extent it's sort of, when they come, and when they don't want to come, they don't come. There's not much you can do. So how does the government think about private investment? Do you proactively go out and try to market, as Agnes was saying? Or do you think that those marketing strategies don't really work very well?
Thank you. Let me come back to one major point that Tanzania has made quite major reforms in so many sectors, including the energy sector. as you know, Mr. Khan, in Tanzania we had one company which has been a monopoly in the energy sector. It has been doing everything actually, generation, transmission, and in terms of, in the whole context, everything. But in 1992, the government decided to introduce private sector. We have also a new law since 1992 trying to encourage the private sector in the energy sector. But the challenge again is the current company, which is TANESCO. Its monopoly is so big, and we need to unbundle all the activities. So that's one of the challenges. How do you unbundle that? But again, we have the challenge of reforming the tariffs. And you don't know how you're going to reform that, because the way we have been operating in Tanzania, that the government has 100% ownership of that company. And once you reform the tariffs, the electricity tariffs are going to be so high. So we have to do that very carefully. One more point, I wanted to go back to the Power Africa initiative. We have received the Power Africa initiative very positively in Tanzania, but there are a number of areas which I think we need to look into together in partnership. As one of the colleagues said, the fear the Americans are having, even most of the private donors who are giving funding to these big projects in Africa, is the fear they are having about Africa, the risk which they think without minimizing those risks, nothing is going to happen in Africa. I think it's time now for the Americans to change the thinking and the mindset. Why? Because Africa is a different continent. We are reforming. There are so many things that we are doing in Africa, and we think we have to work together in supporting Africa in reforming even the legal system and so many areas in that context. And I think the opportunity for America and the other companies are there to help reform all those areas. And the challenge we are having, because we have so many other partners we are working with, like the Chinese. The approach taken by the Chinese is completely different from what the Americans are taking. Actually, in our own thinking in Tanzania, we think Power Africa is a solution. But again, we have a challenge. We don't know how we're going to access all these funds. These funds from different sources have different terms and conditions. And we think some of the instruments are not suitable for Africa, leave alone the MCC. MCC has done a lot in Tanzania, and we think we can go along with the MCC, and we are happy that we are now a beneficiary of MCC2, which is under negotiation at the moment. MCC have done a lot in Tanzania, and we are almost, let me say that at quite a better level than other donors in that area. So I think it's better to also have new instruments for Africa, so that we know exactly how much we're going to access in terms of funding. But again, since most of the countries in Africa, like Tanzania, we have to plan. You have to predict how much resources you're going to get for certain projects. We have opportunities, but we don't know how much you're going to get from the different sources. So those are some of the challenges. I think we can discuss more issues in that area.
Sure. think one of the